With the flick of a switch, it all went dark for Russia. Putin's troops didn't last long. Total chaos erupted as Russia's army turned on itself, and it's all because of the clinical precision of the US. It took away the one thing keeping Putin's front line alive. Now, Russia is on life support, and its soldiers don't know where to turn, what to hit, or how to survive. Starlink is gone. Anarchy reigns in the Russian military. In southern and eastern Ukraine, Russia's commanders are panicking. Their units, which rely heavily on communication to exploit gaps in Ukraine's defenses, have been cut off. The US, due to Elon Musk and SpaceX's decision to disable Starlink terminals across a 1,000-kilometer or 620-mile stretch of the front line, has crippled Russia's ability to communicate. With Starlink down, they can't talk, they can't organize their FPV drone assaults, but more importantly than any of that, Russia's forces can no longer tell friend from foe. Orders simply aren't coming in anymore as commanders are scrambling to figure out how to tell their soldiers what to do. And the failure to do so is leading to friendly fire on the Russian side in some of the most important parts of the front lines. Atesh, which is a partisan group operating on Ukraine's behalf, has revealed what's now happening to Russia's soldiers in Zaporizhzhia. Their troop command within Russia's 115th Regiment has been effectively paralyzed, Atesh says. The same is happening in Kupiansk, where Russia has already experienced substantial losses after having previously claimed that it had taken the city. According to Euromaidan, Ukraine now holds 90% of Kupiansk, and with Starlink snatched away from Russia by the US, the rest of the city seems primed to be liberated. And all that Russia's forces can do is fire blindly, accidentally turning on themselves because they can no longer communicate. Without stable communications on the front line, chaos begins, Atesh claims. The lack of coordination is already leading to heavy losses, and not only from enemy fire. This is no empty claim from Atesh. In Zaporizhzhia, Russian soldiers started gunning each other down after it all went dark. A complete breakdown of communications caused by the US decision to pull the plug on Starlink resulted in friendly fire in the Zaporizhzhia region, the Kyiv Post reports. Russia's soldiers were unaware of each other's positions. That was already a risk for Russia. Back in the summer, Russia's forces switched to a small unit strategy across the front lines. Rather than sending infantry in large groups with armor backing them up to make breakthroughs, Russia instead started sending what Viktor Trehubov, who is the spokesperson for the Khortytsia Operational Strategic Troop Group, calls a constant small flow of meat that never stops. In other words, the large units were broken down into smaller ones of just 2 to 5 soldiers, all of which started probing for tiny gaps in Ukraine's defenses. It all went wrong for Russia in Zaporizhzhia when Starlink went down. A unit of Russia's soldiers opened fire on another, leading to an entire assault group of occupiers being destroyed. The final casualty count when the bullets stopped flying and the dust had settled was 12 Russian invaders destroyed, not by Ukraine's drones, but by Russia's own hand. Russia's dependence on civilian technology has turned against it, Atesh declared, adding, once communications disappear, command collapses and troops begin destroying themselves. As for what's happening to Russia on the front lines, all of its units that are reliant on Starlink can no longer transmit secure data. Commanders can't coordinate attacks. When they try, they have to do so via open channels that are open to Ukrainian interception, which only creates more problems. If it's not Russian soldiers firing on each other, it will be Ukrainian ambushes awaiting Russian units that have been told to push forward on channels that Ukraine is listening in on. This is a disaster for Russia. As Ukrainian electronic warfare expert Serhiy Bestkresnov says on Telegram, the enemy doesn't even have a problem on the fronts. The enemy has a disaster. All command of the troops has collapsed. Assault operations have been stopped in many areas. And he's not wrong. When Russia's soldiers aren't firing on each other, they're being forced to hold positions rather than launch assaults, relieving enormous amounts of pressure on the front lines. As Euromaidan Press reported on February the 6th, sources within Ukraine's general staff say that Russia losing access to what it calls the grey Starlink terminals that they were using to communicate with one another has had a massive impact on Russia's assault volume. By 4 p.m. on February the 5th, Ukraine's general staff had recorded 56 assaults across the entire front. Though that sounds like a large number, it's substantially lower than usual. On any other given day, Russia launches between 1.5 and twice that number of assaults. But with the Starlinks down, Putin's forces are being forced into a catch-22 situation. Either they rush in blind, which is how you get situations like the one in Zaporizhzhia, where Russia's soldiers killed one another, or you stop the assaults and relieve the pressure on Ukraine. It's a no-win situation for Russia, and it gets worse for Putin. As Paul Warburg points out, what we've seen across the combat lines might seem relatively small, at least on the surface. Yes, Russia's soldiers are killing one another, but assaults are still happening. But it turns out to be the single most important combat scenario for Russia to move forward that has now effectively been closed off, Warburg claims. With the Starlink connections dead, Russia's drones can't do the damage that they've been doing throughout the Ukraine war. Stick with us until later in the video and we'll explain exactly why that is. Let's return to Starlink and the US decision for a moment. As Forbes explains in its report on what's happening to Russia right now, both Ukraine and Russia have made heavy use of the commercial Starlink service provided by Elon Musk and SpaceX. That service provides long-range and secure jam-resistant communication channels, which have been essential for both sides. But on February the 5th, Musk flipped the switch. Ukraine's defense minister, Mikhailo Fedorov, has said as much in a statement that he released on February the 5th. According to Fedorov, Musk and the US have added the commercial Starlink terminals that Ukraine has been using to a whitelist, ensuring they remain active and secure. But those that Russia is trying to use have been blacklisted, which essentially takes them offline until the US chooses otherwise. Starlink whitelist is working. Authorized terminals operate normally. We continue verification and are working with SpaceX to ensure rapid terminal registration, Fedorov declared on X, adding, "This is the first case globally being implemented in real time." Russia, on the other hand, has been left in the dust. The Starlink terminals it have been using aren't officially registered. In short, that means they're blacklisted. And when the US detects that an unofficial terminal is being used, SpaceX shuts it down, and the Russian command is forced to go silent. The effect on Russia has been catastrophic, Forbes reports. Beyond the friendly fire incidents that we've already covered, some of Russia's units have lost 90% of their internet communications. And frankly, Russia brought this on itself. The US and Musk have controversially done little to stop Russia from using Starlink for most of the Ukraine war. However, a Russian attack in the Kharkiv region of Ukraine on January the 27th changed all of that. In an attack that Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky immediately denounced as terrorism, Russia took aim at a passenger train in the Kharkiv region, leaving 5 Ukrainian civilians dead. The attack was brutal. Ukraine reports that it has only been able to find fragments of the 5 bodies. As Zelensky put it, in any country a drone strike on a civilian train would be considered in exactly the same way, purely as terrorism. There is not and cannot be any military purpose in this. Musk and the US agreed. Putin pushed his luck too far and his troops have lost Starlink as a result. Ukraine has been quick to show its appreciation to Musk and the US. On February the 2nd, the BBC reported that Fedorov had hailed Musk as a true champion of freedom and a true friend of the Ukrainian people for his and SpaceX's response to the news of what happened in Kharkiv, along with the news that Russian drones with Starlink connectivity were operating in Ukraine. Musk responded in a post on X stating, "Looks like the steps we took to stop the unauthorized use of Starlink by Russia have worked." Musk then added a simple statement that could have huge ramifications for the future. Let us know if more needs to be done. Now for Russia, this means that what's happening to its frontline forces right now is far from over. This is no temporary shutdown of Starlink. It seems to be permanent, and Musk, along with the US, is ready to do more if they can. The situation is getting desperate for Russia. But before we go deeper into that, this is why we make the military show. Explaining how power moves and how one action can change an entire war is what we do. If you're new here, hit subscribe so you don't miss what's next on the channel. Russia is now scrambling. In a moment, we're going to come back to what we mentioned earlier about the other major issue that losing access to Starlink is going to cause for Russia. But before we do that, this is the situation that Russia faces across the entire 620-mile stretch of the front line where it has lost access to Starlink. According to Euromaidan Press, Russia's forces have been reduced to begging for even the most basic of radios to help them communicate with one another. Putin isn't providing those radios. Russian Telegram channels have put out the call, with one named Voyenkry Ruskoye Vyesny raising about 8.5 million rubles, or around $110,000, to buy the equipment that the Kremlin won't purchase. Losing Starlink is the reason why all of this is happening, as the channel explains. Due to the blocking of Starlink terminals, troop management has become more difficult on almost all fronts. Soldiers are writing to us and asking for help with equipment, radio bridges and radio stations. Voyenkry Ruskoye Vyesny said on its fundraiser post, "Caps are in hands and the Kremlin isn't filling them. It expects its soldiers to continue marching to their deaths and even kill each other, just for the small chance that they might take territory in Ukraine. Other pro-Kremlin military bloggers are claiming that the US just snapped Russia's Achilles heel. It goes without saying that communications are vital on the front line of any war. When the system a military is using to communicate is snatched away in an instant, everything falls into disarray. That's what we're seeing on the front lines right now. As the Kyiv Post reports, Russia's commanders have been reduced to trying to deploy backup channels. This isn't working. Russia's own electronic warfare systems are jamming with the primitive radios that the country's soldiers are trying to use to communicate with one another. We guess that means the $110,000 in funds raised to buy more radios has gone down the drain. In other instances, the same outlet reports, Russia's commanders have had to report to using paper maps to outline what they want their soldiers to do. Sometimes those commanders manage to put their orders on memory sticks, but those sticks have to be transported by couriers. Orders that once took seconds to be transmitted are now taking anywhere from a few hours to a few days. Russia is fighting a 21st century war without access to the one tool that made fighting that war possible. Now, it's time to come back to the other major problem that losing Starlink will cause for Russia. According to Warburg, Russian soldiers accidentally killing each other because they can't communicate is only the start of Putin's problems. Starlink was also vital for Russia's drone campaign, not necessarily in terms of the FPV drones that Russia is using on the front lines, Warburg explains, but because Starlink being taken away affects very specific categories of drones and very specific categories of assaults. Indeed, Russia has been using Starlink with its drones for several different purposes. As Medusa points out, Russia was never supposed to have access to Starlink in the first place. It's been able to use Musk's internet platform because it's been smuggling Starlink terminals to its soldiers via Central Asia and the Persian Gulf since at least 2023. Those terminals have been attached to drones, which Russia's forces have used to stream direct footage from the battlefield to command posts in the rear. Often conducted via Discord, Medusa claims, these live streams allowed Russia's commanders to see what was happening on the front, and with that knowledge came the ability to find gaps in Ukraine's defenses. Do you remember what we mentioned earlier about Russia using smaller units of soldiers? Well, the gaps that Russia's drones were finding and transmitting back to command via Starlink were often the very gaps that these small units tried to exploit. And what it does, Warburg says, of the US cutting Russia's Starlink access, is it closes one of the few gaps that Russia could exploit at an opportune moment to actually have breakthroughs against Ukraine. Warburg explains that Russia's tactics, especially at this point during the Ukraine war, are to send everything that it has to poke small holes in Ukraine's defenses. That's where the live streaming that Medusa mentions comes into play. That footage is invaluable for poking holes. It shows Russia's commanders where Ukraine's defenses are, and may even allow them to pick out safe corridors for Russia's small units of ground forces to traverse, allowing them to get closer to Ukraine's fortifications. But with Starlink gone, that ability disappears. What this leaves Russia with is reconnaissance drones on the front lines that aren't able to send the information that they need to send to Russian command. At least, not in any practical way. Russia still has the option of using towers and relays to enable its drones to transmit their footage to command. However, both are vulnerable to electronic warfare techniques. We mentioned earlier that radios aren't going to be ideal for Russia's soldiers to use for communication because Russia itself is sending out jamming signals that make those radios difficult to use. The same goes for drones. If it's not Ukraine's electronic warfare systems stopping the signals, it's Russia's platforms. It's friendly fire again, just in a different way. Russia also has the option of using fiber optic drones, which overcome the electronic warfare problem, but those types of drones are expensive due to the use of fiber optic cables, and the cables themselves aren't ideal. They limit the drone's movement, and if they're found, they can be cut. Warburg adds that pathing and scaling the use of these types of drones are also problems that Russia can't overcome. Starlink-powered drones overcame all of these electronic warfare and fiber optic-related issues for Russia, and now they're gone. On the battlefield, this manifests in Russia no longer being able to exploit the gaps that it once exploited. There is a scenario where Russia has, in some cases, been able to actually create gaps, Warburg explains. And it turns out that this is the only type of scenario, or at least the most typical type of scenario, where Russia can actually move forward a little bit. And that is where Russia overcomes the traditional Ukrainian electronic warfare defenses one way or another. And you can see the problem here. With Starlink lost, Russia's commanders can't find the gaps. Ukraine's electronic warfare defenses have been amplified by Russia's loss of Starlink, leaving Russia's drone operators to either deal with cables or take the risk of using drones that could be jammed because they need towers and relays to beam their footage back to Russian command. In essence, Starlink served as Russia's eyes in Ukraine. Musk and the US have just plucked those eyes out, which is how you end up with Russian soldiers destroying each other rather than the enemy. With its eyes gone, Russia now faces two major problems that could transform how the Ukraine war is fought. The first is that its rate of advance is going to slow to, well, not a crawl. It was already slow. Even back in late January, before the Starlink shutdown, Russia's offensive was crawling forward at the slowest pace of any military for over a century. The Kyiv Post reports. So if Russia was already crawling, losing Starlink means that it's going to be trying to move forward without any kneecaps. Russia's offensive has just gone prone, and the advances of 15 to 70 meters, or 49.2 to 229 feet per day that it has been making, are going to look magnificent compared to what comes next. Russia isn't crawling forward anymore, its soldiers will be dragging themselves forward by their fingertips. And that's only going to contribute more to the second major problem that losing Starlink causes for Russia: massive casualties. It really is significant, Warburg says of the Starlink shutdown, and it will help Ukraine in almost every aspect of their warfare. It will help them from a defensive perspective, but more importantly, it will also help them from an offensive perspective and from an attritional perspective, by helping Ukraine to increase the rate of casualties that they're able to inflict upon the Russian military. It's not like Russia was doing well on the casualty front before it lost Starlink either. Since the beginning of Putin's invasion, Russia has lost over 1.24 million people. In January alone, Ukraine eliminated about 30,000 Russian soldiers from the battle. And when we say eliminated, we mean killed, not injured. On February the 8th, United 24 media reported that Russia had lost 1,040 soldiers, along with 8 pieces of artillery. That's around what we've come to expect from a war that is costing Russia about 1,000 soldiers daily. However, we mentioned earlier that Russia is conducting around half its number of daily assaults, which means it's losing the same number of soldiers it always was, despite not attacking as often. And adding to all of this is yet another problem for Russia. It's lost the ability to conduct some of its most important types of long-range strikes. And we told you earlier about how Russia can no longer use Starlink as a conduit for live-streamed footage that its drones capture. And that costs Russia a very specific type of strike, which is a responsive long-range drone strike where soldiers can look at a feed in real time and select targets in real time. That capability is gone now, which amounts to yet more pressure alleviated on Ukraine's defenses. So let's sum all of this up. Musk and the US pulling Starlink from Russia means that Russia's soldiers are killing each other. And if it's not traditional friendly fire hurting Russia, it's Russia's own electronic warfare systems preventing it from using its drones as it normally does. The gaps that Russia was creating or exploiting in Ukraine's defenses aren't going to be anywhere near as easy for Russia to find anymore. Russian commanders are desperately using paper maps to communicate orders, while milli-bloggers try to crowdfund for equipment that isn't going to help their soldiers. And Russia is going to lose even more soldiers despite launching fewer assaults because Ukraine has been given a massive upper hand. It's the flip of a switch that could kill Putin's invasion. And this is a country that is already dealing with the largest troop losses in modern history. Putin's war may have already been over, making the loss of Starlink the final nail in the coffin. Ukraine is killing Russia's soldiers at an astonishing rate already, and you can find out all about it and how Ukraine knows just how much damage it is causing in our video. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the Military Show for more coverage of the latest crises to befall Putin and his Kremlin cronies.